The HOA forged my land papers and told me I was standing on their property. They called it just empty land. But when I heard that bulldozer tear through my fence, I knew they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. They built 12 commercial buildings on the property my father left me, and thought I was just a sentimental old man. I let them finish. Every nail, every wall was evidence. And when I walked into court, one deed silenced the whole town. The first sound wasn't birds or the kettle finishing its soft whistle. It was a steady grind that didn't belong to morning, metal teeth chewing wood. I stood in the kitchen with my enamel mug halfway lifted, felt vibration in the floorboards, and smelled diesel before the breeze pushed dust under the door. Redwater mornings are usually thin as paper, frost on the grass, a hawk drawing circles, the lake laying light like glass. This one had a different edge. I set the mug down and stepped through the screen door into a cold that squared my shoulders. Across the pasture, beyond the line where dead grass dissolves into scrub, a yellow dozer shouldered forward and bit into my fence. Those rails were the old kind, hand-planed pine Sarah and I painted white one lean summer. The blade lifted, and the first post gave with a dry cry, paint flurrying into the air like ash. Somewhere behind the machine, a laborer laughed at something small and mean. "Morning," a voice called, bright as a brochure. A young man in a crisp polo with a fresh logo stood with one sneaker on my survey stone, clipboard in hand. He smiled like he was about to upsell me on cable. "Community Association. Annexation approved last year, sir. You might have missed the notices. This parcel is slated for commercial development." "You're on my land," I said. No more and no less. He tapped the page with a pen. Yoga, dentist, cafe. Phase 1 completes in June. Progress. The way he said, "sir," didn't hold respect. It held time he thought I didn't have. The dozer reversed. Beep, 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 and surged again. A crossrail cracked and kicked free, bone white where weather hadn't reached. A picture came the way some do, uninvited and complete. Sarah on a ladder in a floppy hat, wrist flicking, telling me the fence would outlast us both. "What's your name?" I asked. "Camden. Cam to most folks." I nodded like I was writing it in a ledger. "Who signed it?" "Board approval under community eminent domain." He made the phrase smooth, like it had always existed. "You can appeal at the meeting next quarter." "Community eminent domain," I said, tasting each word like a pebble. Uplake, the little dam made its faint, constant hush. Dust climbed the sunlight. The breeze carried the dry sweetness of pine and the sour of diesel. "You filed with the county?" "All standard," he said. "Unincorporated parcel annexed into common area per board action. If you have concerns, the calendar's online." Behind him, the dozer nosed through a corner where Sarah had planted blue flax. The blade took the clump, earth and all, and flung it. My day tilted. Not much, just enough to make everything sharp. I left him talking to his clipboard and cut across the pasture toward the stream. The cold sat heavier under the cottonwoods. I know every bend and rock in that run. After the 2011 floods, I adjusted the grade a half-inch at a time until spring water laid itself down quiet. The bench sat where two trunks leaned toward each other, except it didn't sit. Tire tread had crossed through, clean and final. One leg sheared off, the seat split and lay crooked on the gravel. Sarah's bench. I set my palm to the broken wood, counted to 10, and let the wind turn the reeds into paper. The creek already ran a shade browner from the churn up the hill. When I came back, the dozer had eaten farther than I liked. Camden dictated into his phone, that tone people use when they want witnesses without witnesses. "Contact utilities, install silt fence, annexed parcel cleared by noon." He saw me and brightened. "Everything okay, sir?" "You've got a map with a lot of confidence," I said. "You got one with history?" "We've followed the recorded instruments. he answered smoothly. Unincorporated land. Annexed last year. Common area. Per board action, I said. The wind pushed dust past us in a slow parade. A raven scolded from the cottonwood. And the county? He lifted a shoulder. All standard. I didn't argue the way he expected. I took the long way to the house and stepped into the quiet that old wood keeps. My enamel mug had left a brown ring on the table. I wiped it with my thumb and left the smear. In the hall, the framed topo map of Redwater hung straight. The lake like a puddled coin. The creek a thin blue nerve. I opened the filing cabinet and slid out a manila envelope with more weight than paper should carry. The deed, the metes and bounds. I laid it on the kitchen table and smoothed the creases. Then I pulled the drawer with the drafting triangles I kept when I retired from the dam. Old tools have a language your hands remember. I traced the boundary with the edge of a ruler and felt my breathing settle into that boxy rhythm you keep when numbers go under your fingers. Outside, the dozer worked another length. Inside, the house listened with me. I took the deed to the back porch where the light was good. The ink looked the way old truth looks, faded but not weak. Across the pasture, Camden had moved closer to the stream, pointing, narrating the destruction as tasks accomplished. The dozer's blade bit, lifted, bit. The chain link they carried on the trailer would be next. They'd call it safety and believe the word changed the deed. Annexed for commercial development, Camden called to no one and everyone. Stewardship starts with a deed. I said it softly to hear how it sounded outside my head. The hawk came lower, working the field like it was reading. A gust found the torn end of a rail and made a small wooden flag of it for a second, then let it drop. Rain went from suggestion to fact. I could have yelled. I could have stood in front of the machine and made a scene. That isn't how water or paper or time works. They work slow and certain. I've spent enough days walking spillways with a clipboard to know you don't fight a current at the lip. You follow it to the gate. I folded the deed along the old crease, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked the envelope under my arm like a book you mean to lend, but won't. I stepped to the edge of the porch. Camden shaded his eyes to see what I carried. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I let the wind fill my lungs. I let the anger move through the wide parts of me and settle where I keep my tools. Then I said it the way you say something to the earth so it will hold it for you. Let's see how deep your paperwork really goes, I whispered. By late morning, the dozers went quiet, leaving a smear of mud where the fence had been. The kind of silence after machines stop feels heavier than the noise itself, like the land is catching its breath. I went inside, peeled off my jacket, and stared at the map still lying open on the kitchen table. The black lines of my property were clean and certain, the ink thick where my father had signed it 50 years ago. Beneath the folded edge, the county seal caught the light like a coin. I took the envelope, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and drove the half hour into town. The sky was a hard metallic blue, the kind that makes distance look endless. Redwater's main street hadn't changed since Sarah and I first came here. Gas station, diner, the post office leaning a little to one side. Only the HOA office was new, built from glass and pretense, sitting like a polished stone at the edge of the golf course. Inside, the air smelled like coffee pods and printer ink. A young receptionist looked up from behind a counter too tall for its purpose. "Can I help you, sir?" "My name's Jake Remy," I said, setting the plastic sleeve down gently. "I think your people tore down something that didn't belong to them." She blinked at the papers, then tapped her headset. "One moment, please." A door opened behind her, and in came the same man from the field, Camden Sharp, wearing the same confident grin. The kind that comes free with youth and borrowed authority. "Mr. Remy," he said, as if we'd met at a barbecue. "Still upset about the fence?" I unsealed the sleeve, slid the document out, and placed it flat on the counter. About the fence and the 5 acres it marked. This is my deed, filed and notarized. You might want to check your maps before your contractors destroy any more property. He leaned over the paper, tapping it with his pen like he was scoring a test. We've been over this. The board approved annexation under the Community Eminent Domain Clause for unincorporated parcels. That's not a law, I said. He smiled as though I were slow to catch on. It's in the bylaws, passed by unanimous vote last year. Eminent domain is a government power, I said. You're not the government. Progress doesn't wait for paperwork, Mr. Remy. Behind him, another door opened. A woman stepped out, tall, composed, a navy blazer that matched the steel in her eyes. Bethany Whitfield. I'd seen her photo in the local paper, the new HOA president, praised for modernizing Redwater. Is there a problem here? She asked. Her voice was the kind that could turn kindness into order. Camden gestured toward me. This gentleman's confused about parcel integration. Bethany gave me the kind of look reserved for outdated furniture. Mr. Remy, the community has expanded significantly. Your lot was never properly recorded as exempt, and the annexation was conducted per HOA procedure. You'll be compensated if necessary. I pointed at the seal on my deed. The county recorded it in 1968. It's private land. My name's on it. My wife's ashes are on it. There's no amount of HOA procedure that changes that. Her lips curved, something between pity and patience. We'll review your concerns at the next quarterly board meeting. I gathered my papers slowly, feeling every eye in the room watching the old man who didn't know when to quit. You've got 30 days before you pour another foundation, I said quietly, because after that, what you're building won't just be on my land. It'll be under my claim. Bethany's expression didn't change, but I saw the smallest twitch in Camden's jaw. That was enough. I left the office to the sound of a printer spitting out fresh agendas. Outside, the wind pushed across the parking lot, carrying the smell of cut grass and wet asphalt. On the horizon, storm clouds stacked like gray mountains. Halfway home, the first drops hit the windshield. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the rain had turned to a steady drumming. I set the papers on the kitchen table to dry, then walked to the window. From the rise, I could see the torn field, the heavy equipment tarped for the night. The fence line was gone, replaced by a line of orange stakes. I poured coffee into the same mug from that morning and sat at the table until the daylight went thin. On the wall above me hung the photograph Sarah took the day we moved here. Me in overalls, standing by that same fence, sun hitting my hair like fire. She'd written on the back, "Our corner of the world. Let it stay honest." The words burned like a match in my chest. I pulled a fresh pad from the drawer and began sketching. Not blueprints this time, but outlines. County records, surveyor names, plat numbers. A map of lies, if that's what it had become. The pencil felt heavy in my hand. Every line I drew made the anger settle into something harder, something useful. By midnight, the storm had passed. I stepped outside. The air smelled of wet cedar and diesel. Under the porch light, the mud gleamed where the posts used to be. The land looked raw, exposed, but it was still mine. I whispered to the night, "You can't annex what you never earned." Then I went back inside, folded the deed with the care of someone packing a wound, and locked it away for morning. The next dawn came slow and colorless. The air was heavy, the kind that carries the taste of iron before a storm. When I stepped outside, the ground still held yesterday's rain. Puddles reflected the sky like small, dull mirrors, and the smell of diesel hung in the grass. From the porch, I could see them. 3 trucks parked along the edge of what used to be my fence line. Their engines idled low, growling in the fog. The workers moved with practiced rhythm, boots squelching in the mud. One man unrolled chain-link fencing while another hammered posts into the soft ground. The clink of metal carried across the field. I walked halfway down the drive before they noticed me. "You can't be here, sir," one of them shouted, not unkindly but rehearsed, like he'd said it 100 times that week. His vest caught the gray light, orange and reflective. "I live here," I said. "That creek is mine." He shrugged, pointing toward the trucks. "Talk to the site manager. Orders are orders." At the far end of the field, Camden Sharp was talking on his phone, even from a distance. His confidence carried. He turned, saw me, and offered a grin that didn't touch his eyes. "Mr. Remy," he called out, "we're putting up safety fencing. Liability issues, you understand." "Safety for who?" I asked. "For everyone." He gestured at the torn earth, the half-finished grading. "We can't have unauthorized folks wandering into a construction zone. You'll get your access back once development's complete." The word unauthorized hit harder than it should have. I thought of Sarah walking that same patch of grass with her gardening gloves on, her laughter bouncing off the trees. Unauthorized. I turned away before the words found me. The sky cracked open then. A quick rumble of thunder followed by a short burst of rain. Within minutes, the creek swelled, water turning thick and the color of coffee. Mud poured from the construction site, carrying silt and roots down the slope. The little stream that had always run clear now looked like it was bleeding. I knelt by the water's edge. Foam gathered around the broken remains of the oak bench. One leg jutted up like a snapped bone, and the name I'd carved into the seat, Sarah, was half buried in clay. My throat tightened, and the rain mixed with something else on my face. When I stood, the new fence gleamed wet and silver. Barbed wire crowned the top, each barb catching droplets of rain that glinted like cold stars. I pressed my palm against it. The metal was slick, unyielding. Behind me, the dozer rumbled to life again, its blade lowered, slicing through what remained of the tree line. One of the old cottonwoods, Sarah's favorite, groaned as roots gave way. The crash rolled across the land like thunder. That sound stayed in me long after the machines left. By evening, when the workers were gone and the lights of the trucks faded up the road, I walked back out. The fence stood there, dividing the life I'd built from the one they were stealing. The wind rattled the chain links, whispering in metallic sighs. Inside, I dried my hands and went straight to the cabinet again. I pulled out the old maps, the ones my father left me when he passed. Each line, each measurement, was written in pencil by a steady hand that believed in precision. The deed was more than ownership. It was proof of stewardship, of keeping something whole. I spread the maps across the table, tracing the black boundaries with my finger. The surveyor's notations read like poetry to me. Meets and bounds, iron pin at Creek Bend, 30 rods north by Oak Line. I had followed those marks since boyhood, knew every rock and tree they described. But when I compared it to the printout Camden had handed me earlier, some digital rendering with perfect lines and corporate fonts, the differences were clear. Their map erased the bends in the creek, straightened what nature had never straightened. They'd drawn my land into their grid like it was a box to be checked. I stared at both maps side by side, one alive, one sterile. Somewhere between them, the truth had been stolen. Night came fast, bringing the kind of quiet that makes every small sound louder. The ticking of the kitchen clock, the hum of the fridge, even the slow creak of the house settling. It all pressed in. I poured myself a half glass of rye and sat with the papers until the liquor ran warm through my chest. By the time I climbed the stairs, I'd made up my mind. Tomorrow, I'd start digging through the county archives. Paper was how they'd stolen this, and paper would be how I'd take it back. From the window, I could still see the new fence glinting under the porch light, a silver scar against the dark. Somewhere beyond it, the creek moved sluggishly, carrying the day's filth downstream. I imagined the silt settling, the water clearing again, slow, patient, inevitable, the way truth always does. Morning light found me before the alarm did. I'd barely slept, only drifted through hours filled with the sound of machinery that wasn't there. I made coffee strong enough to wake the ghosts in the rafters and sat at the table, staring at the folded maps. The rain had cleaned the windows. Beyond them, the air looked rinsed, every blade of grass sharp in the new light. It was time to start building something, not with timber or concrete, but with proof. At 9 sharp, I drove to the county courthouse in town. The building was old stone and quiet as a church, the kind of place where paper outlived people. Inside, it smelled like dust and old ink. The clerk's counter was manned by a woman with glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her name tag read, Helen P., Records Division. "Morning," I said. "I'm looking for property filings for Section 14B, Redwater County. Mine's Parcel 7A, but I think someone's been creative with the borders." Helen's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Creative? Let's call it optimistic." She chuckled under her breath, then disappeared into the archive room, leaving me with the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. When she came back, she set a heavy leather-bound register on the counter. "These go back to the 60s, she said. "If it's on paper, it's in here." I turned the pages, and there it was, Remy Jacob, 1968. 5 acres, water access rights included, clean as daylight. The county seal was intact. The surveyor's name, Harold C. Walker, signed in fading blue ink. "Could I see any recent filings from the HOA?" I asked. Helen frowned. "They filed a subdivision expansion map 8 months ago. Want me to pull it?" I nodded. She printed out a copy from the digital system, a clean, computer-rendered diagram, all straight lines and perfect fonts. My parcel had vanished, absorbed neatly into the new commercial zone. I laid my original plat beside it. Even to the untrained eye, something was off. Their surveyor's signature was too neat, every letter identical to the last. The filing number skipped sequence. I'd seen bad blueprints before. They always had that same sterile confidence. "They forged it," I said quietly. Helen leaned over, squinting. "That's not Harold's signature. He retired 2 years before this date. Would you be willing to sign a statement confirming that?" She smiled in that tired way people do when they recognize a fight worth joining. "I can note what I see in the public record, Mr. Remy. That's about as far as I'm allowed." "That's enough," I said. By noon, I'd scanned every document, every seal, every line of ink that could tell a story. I walked out with a folder thick enough to choke a file cabinet. Outside, the sun had burned away the clouds, and the world felt sharp again. But proof alone wasn't enough. I needed precision, measurements, coordinates, a map that couldn't lie. That's when I thought of Travis Ray. Travis and I served together in the Navy back in '84, both assigned to an engineering unit that built and repaired spillways in places most folks couldn't find on a map. He could read terrain like other men read faces. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year, but when I called, he answered on the second ring. "Jake? Well, I'll be. What's wrong with the world?" "I need your eyes, Travis," I said. "They've redrawn my land on paper. I need to prove where it really sits." He grunted, which was Navy for "I'm on my way." He showed up the next morning in an old green truck that looked like it had never forgiven him for retirement. His beard was grayer, but his hands still carried that steady confidence of a man who's spent his life in measurement. We walked the boundary lines under a sky that smelled of rain again. Travis carried his old Transit, a battered scope that had probably seen more service than either of us. "They straightened your creek," he said after a while, shaking his head. "On their map, it runs like a ruler. Nature doesn't make straight lines like that." Neither do honest people, I said. For 2 days, we worked quietly, sinking iron stakes into the ground where the old markers still hid under weeds. Each time the scope's lens clicked shut, a piece of the truth came back into focus. We logged coordinates, distances, cross-checked against the 1968 plat. When the last stake went in, Travis wiped his hands and looked toward the cluster of new concrete rising at the far end of the field. "Every inch of that plaza's sitting right in your lap," he said. "They didn't even check the meets and bounds." We went back to my garage, which now smelled like coffee, dust, and quiet rage. On the workbench, I spread the county's official map, then laid a clear acetate sheet over it. On that sheet, I'd printed the HOA's forged annexation lines, red ink. "Now," I said, "overlay their construction plan." Travis unfolded another sheet, blue ink, the layout of the 12 commercial buildings. He lined it up carefully. The colors layered together, black, red, blue, and in that moment the whole story became visible. Every building, every parking lot, every sidewalk, they all at dead center inside my boundaries. Travis exhaled through his nose. "Lazy and arrogant," he said. "Bad combination." I stared at the map, the silence in the garage humming with something close to satisfaction. "Let them finish," I said softly. "Every nail they drive is another piece of evidence." Travis looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or salute. "You sure about that, Jake? They're pouring concrete every day." "That's the idea," I said. "Let them spend. Let them build their monument to greed. When it's done, I'll own every inch of it." He nodded slowly, the grin of a man who understood revenge through mathematics. "All right, old friend. I'll make the overlays official. County coordinates, time-stamped." When he left, I stood alone in the dim garage. The acetate sheets glowed faintly under the hanging bulb, colors crossing like veins. Outside, the creek whispered against its banks, cleaner now, the storm's mud already settling. Somewhere between the hum of the bulb and the murmur of the water, I realized the land wasn't broken. It was just waiting. Somewhere between the hum of the bulb and the murmur of the water, I realized the land wasn't broken. It was just waiting. Weeks passed. The sound of construction became the new weather. Steel clanging, engines coughing, the constant hiss of progress rolling over what used to be peace. Every morning I'd step out on the porch with my coffee and watch the horizon fill with concrete and noise. The birds had moved on. Even the deer had stopped coming down to the creek. From my kitchen window, I saw the skeletons of buildings rise in neat rows. Signs went up. Evergreen Plaza. A vision for tomorrow. They built a road across what used to be the lower pasture, poured asphalt over routes that had outlived 3 generations. At night, floodlights bathed the valley in a sterile white glow, brighter than any moonlight ever dared to be. The whole thing should have felt like defeat, but it didn't. Not anymore. I had their sin printed in layers of red, black, and blue acetate sitting in my garage like a weapon that didn't need gunpowder. Travis called every few days with updates, his voice carrying that calm certainty of a man who knew math never lied. "Every coordinate checks out," he'd say. "They're building a shopping plaza in the middle of your 5 acres. "Good," I'd answer. "Let them." The day of the grand opening came in early summer, bright and loud. The air smelled of fresh asphalt and cheap champagne. I parked my truck halfway up the hill by the tree line, where Sarah's bench used to sit before they crushed it. From there, I had a clear view of the new plaza. 2 rows of single-story buildings framed a wide courtyard where a crowd gathered. Banners fluttered, and the local news van idled at the curb, its dish spinning lazily toward the sky. Bethany Whitfield stood center stage in a red suit that caught the sun like fire. She was holding the microphone with the posture of someone who thought God himself was tuned in. "Today," she announced, "we celebrate community progress. New business, new jobs, and a brighter future for Redwater. Her voice echoed against the brick facades. Beside her, Camden Sharp stood with his perfect hair and plastic smile, clapping like he was sealing a deal. Behind them, a wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance between two balloon pillars, pink, white, and green. I pulled my binoculars from the dashboard. Through the lenses, I could see faces, contractors, local officials, even the mayor. They laughed, toasted, patted each other on the back. A marching band from the high school played something cheerful that didn't belong to this valley. Bethany took a pair of oversized gold scissors from a velvet tray. Cameras flashed. The ribbon shimmered in the wind, that same shade of crimson as the forged survey line they'd used to steal my land. For a moment, I thought about Sarah again, how she'd have hated the noise, the arrogance. Then the ribbon snapped, and the crowd cheered. A new chapter of someone else's dream had begun, on mine. I set the binoculars down and leaned against the truck. The sound of applause carried faintly up the hill, hollow and far away. The wind shifted, and I caught a whiff of the creek, muddy still, but alive. I smiled without meaning to. Every cheer below was another nail sealing their own coffin. That afternoon, I drove into town. The courthouse steps were warm under my boots as I climbed them. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with paper. I handed the clerk a sealed envelope marked Remy Viti Evergreen HOA. Inside were copies of every document, my original deed, Travis's certified survey overlays, and a motion drafted by my new attorney, Sarah Coleman. Sarah had come recommended by Helen, the records clerk who'd helped me weeks ago. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind square glasses, her handshake firm, a water law specialist from Helena. "You built dams?" she'd asked when we first met. "Retired," I said. She smiled. "Then you know the rule. Containment before release." She was right. That's what I'd been doing all along, holding back the flood until the structure was ready. By evening, the local news was already running the story about Evergreen Plaza's opening. I muted the TV, but I watched the pictures. Bethany smiling for the camera. Camden cutting another ribbon in front of a store marked Willow Yoga. I could almost hear him. Progress doesn't wait for paperwork. Outside, thunder rolled low across the plains. I opened the window and listened. The first drops of rain hit the deck with the soft insistence of truth returning. In my garage, the acetate maps waited under the glow of a single bulb. I took them out again, smoothing each layer carefully. Red, black, blue. The colors of arrogance, memory, and proof. Together, they formed a picture clearer than any confession. I reached for a pen and circled the date on the calendar. June 17th, court filing deadline. I drew the circle hard, red ink cutting through the paper. The rain deepened. Across the field, the lights from the plaza shimmered through the downpour, blurred and trembling. I could hear laughter echoing faintly, tinny through the glass, already being washed away by the storm. "They think the ribbon means something," I murmured to myself. "But the ground decides what stays." The creek would rise tonight. I could almost hear it gathering strength under the bridge. I poured myself a measure of rye, raised it toward the window, and whispered to Sarah, wherever she was, "Here's to patience." The first flash of lightning painted the sky white. For a split second, the plaza below glowed like a mirage, too perfect, too temporary. And in that flash, I knew what had to come next. By morning, the storm had rinsed the valley clean. The asphalt shimmered under the early sun, puddles still clinging to the curbs of Evergreen Plaza. From my porch, I could see the balloon pillars sagging, the banners torn from the wind. The celebration had wilted overnight. I poured coffee, hot and black, and watched steam rise like a prayer that knew better than to ask for anything. It was time. Down in town, Sarah Coleman met me outside her small law office, the kind of place where the sign creaked on its chain and every file inside had fingerprints older than the paint. She had a brown folder tucked under one arm, and the smile she gave me was a rare thing in this world. Half business, half faith. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since the first post came down," I said. Inside, we sat across a desk littered with drafts and sticky notes. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and determination. Sarah opened the folder and slid a letter toward me. "This is it," she said. "Your official demand for vacation and cessation of operations. 30 days to vacate, return the property, and compensate for damages." I read the first line slowly. "To the Redwater Homeowners Association and affiliated contractors, notice is hereby given." The words felt heavier than any nail or fence post. At the bottom, my name waited beside hers, the ink still wet. "Once it's mailed certified," she continued, "they can't say they didn't know. It'll be public record. After that, they'll respond, and I promise you, it won't be with reason." I nodded. "Good. I don't need reason. I need reaction." She grinned. "That's the spirit." By noon, the letter sat in the outgoing bins down at the post office, stamped, sealed, and bearing the weight of months of patience. I watched the clerk slide it into the metal chute, and when the door shut with that soft clank, I felt something settle inside me, like the gate on a dam locking into place before the flood. 3 days later, the response came. I found the envelope in my mailbox, thick and smug, addressed in embossed lettering from Keller, Wharton and Briggs, a law firm that sounded as expensive as it was insincere. The return label alone smelled of arrogance. I slid it open with a kitchen knife and unfolded the pages. It wasn't an answer. It was an insult. "Cease and desist immediately. Any further attempts to interfere with legitimate business operations will be considered harassment and trespass. Damages and counterclaims will be pursued." Signed by someone named Benjamin Frost, escrow, a man who probably hadn't seen mud on his boots in 20 years. I called Sarah. "You were right," I said. "They didn't respond with reason." Her laughter crackled through the phone. "That's not a defense, Jake. That's a confession on letterhead. They didn't even check the county filings, did they?" "Not a chance." "Good," she said. "Let them think it's a bluff. The quieter you stay, the louder their arrogance gets. And arrogance leaves fingerprints." That night, I sat in the living room with the letter spread out on the coffee table beside my deed and Travis's overlays. Lightning flickered again beyond the window, though the sky stayed dry. I traced the red line of the forged plat with my finger, then the black of the original, and finally the blue of the 12 buildings. Together, they formed something almost poetic, a record of theft so clean it could only have been made by people who thought no one would ever look. I thought of Camden Sharp's easy grin, the way he'd said, "Progress doesn't wait for paperwork." Maybe not, but justice had its own schedule, and it never missed an appointment. The next morning, I drove past the plaza. The lot was full, the stores humming with early business, coffee shop, yoga studio, real estate office. I slowed at the entrance, watching customers push through glass doors under the fresh green evergreen sign. A man waved me on impatiently from behind, and I drove the rest of the way home in silence. When I reached my mailbox, another envelope was waiting. Not legal this time, but personal. No return address. Just my name written in looping, careful handwriting. Inside was a single page torn from a glossy invitation. Evergreen Plaza. Grand Opening Gala. Saturday night. Someone had scrawled across it in black ink. Thought you might want to see what progress looks like. Camden. For a long time I didn't move. The paper trembled in my hands, not from anger but from something colder, sharper. It wasn't an invitation. It was a taunt, I laid it flat on the counter, picked up my red pen, and drew a perfect circle around the date. "Progress," I said aloud. "Let's see how it holds up in court." That evening, the sun dropped behind the ridge in a wash of copper light. I stood at the porch railing, looking toward the faint glow of the plaza lights in the distance. Somewhere beyond them, the creek still wound its quiet path through the grass, carrying stories older than any bylaw. The land didn't forget, and neither did I. I poured the last of my coffee down the sink and rinsed the cup. Tomorrow would start the next phase, the one where their words finally met the weight of paper, ink, and fact. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of laughter from the plaza. It came soft and hollow, barely real, already fading before it reached me. "They don't know the storm they built on," I whispered, and I meant it. Because the storm was already gathering, in paperwork, signatures, and quiet, unstoppable proof. 2 weeks later, Sarah Coleman called me. "We've got a court date," she said, her voice steady. "Redwater County Courthouse. Judge Ramirez is presiding." I knew that name. Ramirez had a reputation for being unbending, a man who valued clean records more than clean suits. It was perfect. The morning of the hearing, I dressed the way my father had taught me to show respect for something bigger than yourself. Dark jacket, pressed shirt, old boots that had walked that land longer than any of the HOA's bylaws had existed. When I stepped outside, the sky was clear, but the air felt heavy, like the quiet before a dam release. Sarah met me on the courthouse steps, her briefcase tucked under one arm. "Nervous?" she asked. "Not anymore," I said. "They're the ones who should be." Inside, the courtroom smelled of wood polish and old paper. The HOA's team had already taken their seats. 3 lawyers, all polished and smug, led by a man whose tie cost more than my truck. Behind them sat Bethany Whitfield in another of her power suits, eyes cold, chin high, and next to her, Camden Sharp, scrolling his phone like none of this mattered. The bailiff called the case. Remy versus Redwater Homeowners Association. The sound of it filled the room like the first crack of thunder. Judge Ramirez entered, his black robe moving with quiet authority. "We're here to determine rightful ownership and potential fraudulent filings concerning Parcel 7A, he said. "Ms. Coleman, you may proceed." Sarah rose, calm as ever. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Jake Remy, is the legal owner of the disputed 5-acre property under deed recorded in 1968. The defendants, the Redwater Homeowners Association, have produced a forged annexation plat, falsely incorporating his land into their development. We will prove this with certified county documents and survey overlays." The HOA's lead attorney leaned back, smirking. "We'll be happy to address those claims, Your Honor. The plaintiff's attachment to outdated records has caused unnecessary confusion. The development was approved and filed legally. Progress often stirs nostalgia." "Progress," Sarah repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "Interesting word for theft." I watched Bethany's jaw tighten. Camden leaned in to whisper something, and she nodded, trying to look unfazed. "Mr. Remy," Judge Ramirez said, turning to me, "do you have something to present?" Sarah gave me a small nod. "Go ahead," she whispered. I stood, hands steady, and carried the rolled maps I'd kept safe in my truck. The room's quiet was thick enough to touch. I walked to the display easel set near the bench and unrolled the first map, the original 1968 county plat. The old paper spread out like a confession. "This," I said, tapping the black lines, "is the land my father deeded to me. Surveyed by Harold Walker, filed with the county, sealed and recorded." Then I laid the second sheet on top, the HOA's annexation map, their forgery. The red lines didn't match. They strayed like lies do when pressed too close to truth. "This is what they filed 8 months ago. Same parcel, different story." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The HOA's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, this is a dramatic presentation, not evidence. But Ramirez held up a hand. Sit down, counselor. I find this presentation exceptionally clear. The silence that followed was so sharp I could hear the clock ticking. I took the final sheet, the overlay Travis Ray had prepared, the one that showed the 12 commercial buildings printed in blue, and placed it over the others. The image was undeniable. The plaza sat squarely inside my property, a perfect fit of arrogance over truth. Gasps fluttered through the room. Even the bailiff leaned forward. Sarah stepped up beside me, her voice calm but edged like a chisel. Your Honor, we also have a sworn statement from County Clerk Helen Porter confirming that the signature on the HOA's plat belongs to a surveyor who retired in 1986. The filing number is out of sequence, and the county's own database contains no record of this annexation ever being approved. Ramirez adjusted his glasses, eyes moving over the maps. So what you're saying, Ms. Coleman, is that this entire commercial development sits on land that legally belongs to Mr. Remy? Yes, Your Honor, every square foot. Bethany's composure cracked for the first time. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering sharply. Camden looked pale, his phone forgotten in his hand. The judge turned to their table. Counselor, do you have any legal documentation to refute this evidence? Their lawyer cleared his throat. We will need time to verify the authenticity of— You've had 8 months, Ramirez said. His tone was cold iron. The county clerk's confirmation stands. The forged document invalidates your claim. I'll render my ruling shortly. For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of it all pressed into the room. The months of noise, the arrogance, the sleepless nights. Then Ramirez spoke again, his voice low and final. Court finds for the plaintiff, Mr. Jake Remy, rightful owner of Parcel 7A. The defendant's annexation is null and void pending criminal investigation for forgery. The words landed like thunder rolling through the valley. I turned just in time to see Bethany's face drain of color. She reached for the table, missed, and slumped into her chair. Camden tried to stand, but froze under Ramirez's stare. Sarah exhaled, just once, and whispered, You did it, Jake. Outside, the courthouse doors opened to bright sunlight. Reporters swarmed the steps, but I didn't stop to talk. I lifted the deed in my hand, the same one they'd called outdated, and let the Wofteltun light catch it, paper and ink, nothing more, and everything. The storm had broken, but the cleanup was just beginning. By evening, word had spread through Redwater like wind through dry grass. The local radio station led with it. Judge rules HOA built plaza on private land, entire development in jeopardy. I sat at my kitchen table listening to the newscaster repeat my name as if I were part of local folklore, some stubborn ghost that refused to fade. The courthouse ruling was just a piece of paper, but it was a start. The kind that could pull foundations right out from under 12 brand new buildings. Across the valley, Evergreen Plaza still glowed, unaware of its own expiration date. The streetlights shimmered off empty parking spaces and glass storefronts, the letters on the big sign already collecting dust. Progress looked tired under fluorescent light. The next morning, Sarah Coleman called. It's official, she said. The court order's filed and certified. You can post eviction notices anytime after 10 a.m. Her voice was calm, but beneath it I could hear a small, fierce satisfaction. I thanked her and hung up. I spent the next hour printing the notices on heavy paper, each stamped with the court seal in black ink. Notice of eviction. By order of the Redwater County Court, all operations must cease and vacate within 30 days. I printed 12, one for each business that stood on what was mine. By noon, I drove down the familiar road, my truck tires humming against the asphalt I never approved. The summer sun burned overhead, and the wind carried the smell of hot tar and dust. When I pulled into the plaza, heads turned. A woman stepped out of the yoga studio, a rolled mat under her arm. "Can I help you?" she asked, half smiling. "Yes, ma'am," I said, tacking the first notice squarely onto the glass door. "Court order. You'll want to read that." Her smile faltered as she scanned the page. "Eviction? That can't be right. Our lease is with the HOA." I nodded. "That's the problem. They leased you property they never owned." By the time I reached the dentist's office 2 doors down, the first notice had already drawn a crowd. Store owners stepped outside, papers in hand, faces twisted with confusion and anger. I kept moving down the row, 12 doors, 12 notices. The sound of tearing paper followed me as a few tried to rip theirs down. But I'd already taken photos for record. I wasn't here for confrontation. I was here for closure. Back in my truck, I sat for a moment, watching the sunlight glint off the glass. For months, this place had been a monument to arrogance. Now it looked fragile, hollow. That evening, Sarah called again. "Jake, it's all over the news. Someone filmed you putting up those notices. It's gone viral." I didn't even own a social media account, but by the next day, I didn't have to. My daughter called from Denver. "Dad, you're everywhere. People are calling you the man who let them build the gallows then sprung the trap." I couldn't help but laugh, a quiet sound that felt strange after so long. "Guess patience makes for a good headline," I said. Within 48 hours, the HOA's PR machine kicked in. Bethany released a statement on community television, her tone perfectly rehearsed. "We respect the court's decision, though we believe misunderstandings occurred. The HOA acted in good faith to serve Redwater's growth." Her voice cracked just once, barely noticeable, but the people of Redwater noticed. Then the dominoes began to fall. The first was the developer, a slick man named Preston Hale, who'd partnered with the HOA. His lawyers filed to void all leases, blaming the HOA for fraudulent filings. The second was the insurance company. They refused to cover any losses, citing deliberate misconduct. The third came from the county prosecutor's office, an official investigation into forged plats and signatures. By the end of the week, Bethany's bright red power suits were replaced by gray blazers. Camden Sharp disappeared from sight entirely. Rumor said he'd skipped town, but I figured he'd just found himself trapped under the weight of his own paperwork. Still, I wasn't done. Sarah and I met again to file a second lawsuit, this time against the individuals themselves. "Fraud, conspiracy, and willful destruction of private property," she said, her pen scratching across the form. "They played chess with fake pieces, Jake. Now they'll learn the cost." Outside her office, the sky was soft with dusk. I drove home slow, letting the engine idle at each stop. The sun fell behind the ridge, and the plaza lights flickered in the distance, half burned out, half forgotten. When I got home, I pulled into the gravel drive and turned off the truck. The night was quiet, except for the steady hum of crickets. I stood there for a while, looking toward the creek, listening to the way the water had found its rhythm again. The land was healing, inch by inch. Inside, I poured a drink and sat on the porch with my old dog-eared maps spread beside me. The ink had faded in places, but the lines still told the truth. Paper had ruined them. Paper had saved me. The next morning, the mail came early. A letter from Sarah with a single sentence inside. "They're finished." I held it in my hands and felt the faintest tremor of peace. Then I walked down to the mailbox at the road, taped the letter beside the old rusted flag, and stood there a moment under the wide Montana sky. The wind came low through the grass, stirring the sound of the creek below. For months I'd heard nothing but engines and hammers. Now, for the first time, the valley sounded like home again. When the papers fell, they didn't just bring justice. They brought silence. And in Redwater, silence meant freedom. That silence didn't last long. By the weekend, the HOA board was in full panic. Bethany tried to turn the story on its head, claiming I'd exploited a technicality to ruin local business. But the town wasn't buying it anymore. Folks had watched her climb up on that podium in her red suit and smile while the bulldozers leveled my fence. Now the same people were whispering behind her back in grocery aisles and gas stations. It wasn't anger that filled Redwater. It was awakening. People started looking through their own bylaws, their own deeds. A few even called to ask how to check their property filings. "You made us read again, Jake," one neighbor told me on the phone. "Feels good to know what's ours." By then, half the plaza's tenants were gone. The first to leave was the dentist. He packed up before sunrise, the moving truck rumbling past my house like a ghost train. The yoga studio followed 2 days later, hauling mirrors and mats into a U-Haul that looked too small for all their dreams. Every time a truck rolled out, I stood by the porch railing, coffee in hand, and watched until the taillights vanished. There was no triumph in it, just balance returning. Still, the fight wasn't over. Sarah called one morning, her voice tight. "Jake, they're filing an appeal." "Of course they are. It won't go far," she assured me. "But they're trying to stall the evictions. Classic delay tactic." "They can try," Sachin, I said, "but the land won't wait for them." Later that day, I drove into town to check the plaza myself. The asphalt lot shimmered in the summer heat, the air rippling like it was alive. Half the storefronts were dark now, windows empty except for taped notices and dusty reflections. The sign out front, Evergreen Plaza, Building the Future, had lost the F. Now it just read, Building the Future. Camden's handwriting still stared back at me from the invitation he'd sent weeks before. I remembered the words scrawled across it. "Thought you might want to see what progress looks like." I kept that piece of paper folded in my wallet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what arrogance costs. Near the plaza's center, a small group of business owners had gathered. One of them, a man in scrubs, looked up as I passed. "Mr. Remy, what's going to happen now?" "The court gave you 30 days, I said. "You can stay if you want. Sign a new lease under my terms. Or you can go. I'm not here to ruin anyone's living, just to reclaim mine." He nodded slowly. "You're a fair man, sir. More than they ever were." As I turned back toward my truck, a familiar voice called my name. Bethany. She stood near the entrance, sunglasses hiding most of her face, a folder clutched under one arm. "You've made your point," she said. "But think about what you're doing. An entire community's investment wiped away. Is that really justice?" I met her gaze and held it. "Justice isn't about comfort, Bethany. It's about correction." She exhaled, shaking her head. "You could have sold it, made money, been reasonable." "I already paid for this land once," I said. "With years, with memory, with my wife's ashes by that creek. Why should I pay again for what's mine?" She had no answer. Only the sound of the wind moving through the empty lot behind her, rattling the metal of abandoned signs. That night, Sarah sent me a message. The prosecutor's office filed charges. Camden Sharp, arrested for forgery and falsifying county records. The board's finished. I stared at the text until the screen dimmed. The storm had spent itself, finally. But I couldn't sleep. I stepped outside and followed the narrow path down to the creek. The moon was bright enough to paint the rocks silver. The fence line had been restored, a simple split rail this time, sturdy and quiet. I ran my hand along it, feeling the cool grain of the wood under my fingers. The water murmured beside me, steady and familiar. I thought of Sarah, my Sarah, who used to sit on the old bench and listen to that same song. It's the sound of patience, she used to say. Even the river knows when to wait. In the distance, the plaza lights flickered like the last embers of a dying fire. I could almost hear their hum giving way to the crickets, to the frogs, to the night reclaiming its rhythm. I went back to the porch and found the folder Sarah Coleman had sent over that afternoon. Inside were final copies of the court order, the signed notices, and a short handwritten note at the end. It's done, Jake. The land is yours again. By right, by record, by proof. I folded the letter once and slid it into the same drawer where I kept the deed. Together they sounded like closure when the wood clicked shut. By morning, a thin layer of fog rolled through the valley, softening everything it touched. I made breakfast, poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and set one beside the empty chair across from me. For the first time in months, I wasn't planning my next move. The land was still, the creek clean again. Justice had settled like dust after rain, quiet, inevitable, final. Outside, the fog lifted slow, revealing the world I used to know. Fences upright, grass damp with dew, and the faint smell of cedar where the bulldozers had once torn through. The kind of morning that felt like it didn't owe anyone an explanation. That day, I went down to the hardware store in town. The same man who'd once sold nails to Camden now sold me a fresh plank of oak. "You rebuilding that bench?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's time." He helped load the boards into the bed of my truck. As I drove back up the ridge, sunlight burned through the last of the mist, cutting across the fields like gold. The sound of gravel under my tires was the closest thing to music I needed. Back at the ranch, I worked slow. Not careful out of fear, careful out of respect. Each cut of the saw, each drive of a nail echoed like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The scent of sawdust mixed with the cool morning air, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't rebuilding to prove a point. I was just putting something back where it belonged. By noon, the bench stood near the creek again, facing the same way the old one had, toward the bend where the water caught the light just right. I ran my hand across the smooth top rail, the grain warm from the sun. Then I reached into my pocket and took out the brass plate I'd kept all these years. Sarah's name was still etched there, a little tarnished, but whole. I screwed it into place, tightened the last bolt, and stepped back. The land breathed around me, quiet, patient, alive. A truck slowed on the road above. It was Sheriff McKay. He leaned out the window and tipped his hat. "Heard the county's planning to rename that plaza lot back to private. You keeping it?" "For now," I said. "Maybe turn it into something the land can live with." He nodded. "Good to see it back in the right hands." As he drove off, I sat down on the bench. The wood creaked softly under my weight, the way it used to when Sarah would shift beside me. The creek ran clear again, glittering with sunlight. Every drop that rolled past felt like a page turning. A few minutes later, footsteps crunched behind me. It was Helen, the clerk from the courthouse, carrying a brown envelope. "Brought you a certified copy of the ruling," she said. "Thought you'd want the original for your records." I smiled. "You came all this way just for that?" She shrugged. "Felt right. Not every day you see a man beat the system fair and square." I took the envelope, heavy with meaning, and set it on the bench beside me. "Tell Sarah Coleman thank you," I said. "She's got a sharp mind." "She already knows," Helen replied, smiling. "She says justice and patience look good together." When she left, I sat there until the shadows stretched long over the creek. The red glow of sunset touched the oak in a way that made it look alive. The sound of frogs rose from the reeds. Life was filling the silence again. Down in town, Evergreen Plaza had gone dark. The signs were taken down, windows boarded, the once shiny pavement cracked from neglect. The land was waiting to breathe again, to remember what it had been before someone called it progress. I thought about everything that had happened, the forged maps, the courtroom, the noise, the silence after. None of it mattered now except this moment. The wind moved through the grass, whispering against the fence rails. It didn't sound like anger anymore. It sounded like forgiveness. I looked up at the sky, the same wide blue that had watched it all unfold, and spoke softly to the air, to Sarah, to the land itself. They thought it was just dirt, I said, but land remembers, and so does justice. Then I sat back, letting the bench hold my weight, the creek murmuring below like an old friend, telling stories of what used to be and what would be again. If you've ever stood your ground for what's right, you know justice doesn't come fast. It comes steady. Drop a justice in the comments if you've ever dealt with an HOA or fought for what was yours. And if stories like this remind you that patience still wins in the end, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more real tales of land, law, and quiet revenge waiting down the road.